Oh, yes.
Oh ho! There you go. Oh!
Oh. That's always that last move. It really tells a lot. Okay, so thank you very much for joining us this morning, Timothy, again, this time from a different part of the Tokyo Bay. Good morning to everybody who is watching us on YouTube, also Facebook and LinkedIn, and to everybody who is in Clubhouse listening to us as well. We're here, it is October 6th and the 191st episode of Japanese Politics One-on-One with Timothy Langley and me as a host, Maya Matsuoka. So, Timothy, I'm not going to keep people waiting for a long time because obviously everybody's waiting. So I'll give you the screen immediately so that you can tell us what we're going to talk about today. And after that, continue with the body of this episode.
Great. Thank you very much, Maya. And congratulations, 191 episodes consistent and consecutively every Sunday at 8:20 in the morning. And boy, it's just a pleasure to be bringing you what's going on in Japanese politics, the news and the events that's happened over the last week. The yen closed out this week on Friday at 148.72, quite a bit weaker than it closed out this time last week, which was about 142. So the election of Shigeru Ishiba as the new prime minister had two impacts. One was that the yen weakened considerably, and the stock market, the Tokyo stock market, fell 4.8% on Monday. So the announcements of his ascension as party president, and thus to become prime minister, which happened earlier this week. The stock market had closed by then, but it showed its reaction on Monday. So it came as a very carefully watched news. So 4.8, it is repaired somewhat, but the jury is still out on this new prime minister, and I'm going to get into that a little bit better as we get into the beef and the bones of this. I'm reporting today from the port city of Hota, which is between where Costco is on the Chiba side and Tateyama, which is the point of the Boso Peninsula. So surrounded by a lot of wilderness. The cloud cover is, as you can see, just covering the tops of the mountains. I don't think there's going to be any rain today. It's going to be a nice day on Sunday. Yesterday was not so great, but we sailed up in the wind and the rain in any event. But let's get back to the new prime minister, what he's doing. He's 5 days into office, and he has he will be attending this time next week, ASEAN. And so he is going to be in the hot seat throughout this next week. So Saturday, Sunday, a bit of a reprieve. He made a policy speech on Friday. That means he stands at the podium, he speaks to the Diet, and of course all of the cameras are there. But that's it. He's not accosted with questions. So, there are catcalls, but he doesn't have to respond to questions. That happens on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. There's a very tight period of time where he has to deal with the opposition party. He has to allocate them time to ask him questions. We are 1 month away, almost exactly, from the U.S. presidential election, and also tomorrow is the anniversary of the Hamas attack on Israel that we all know about, that is really triggered so much disruption in the Middle East. Since it's the anniversary of that, you can anticipate that there might be a little bit of action going on this week in that area of the world. Public opinion polls are kind of not quite sold on the current prime minister and his cabinet. They're not really so great. When Prime Minister Kishida started, his approval rating was 59%, you might recall. With Mr. Ishiba, he started at 49%. It doesn't seem like a big gap, but it's the lowest in many presidencies. Taro Aso did actually worse when he became president for that 1 year. So it does indicate that maybe everybody's a little bit worried about him. His cabinet approval is even lower, 32% right now. The disapproval is high at 44%, but all things being equal, and they never are, at least the LDP is doing better now than it was in the final several months of the Kishida administration. Actually, maybe 6 or 8 months. The approval rating of Mr. Kishida's presidency and also of the cabinet was very low, as you know. And let me see, what else do we have? Woo! Was that your cat, Maya?
No, it wasn't. Something else.
It's not me.
Oh,
Okay.
it's okay.
Okay, but let me use that as a segue. Let me turn it over to you, and then I'll get into some beef and bones of the rest of today's briefing. And by the way, for those of you that are just listening in, Dan Harada and I did a post-election debrief on Thursday, just maybe 3 days ago. And the popularity and the interest in Japanese politics is just so outstanding. We did maybe a 25-minute briefing. Thousands of people have watched that briefing. And there's just so much interest globally in what's going on in Japanese politics, and few avenues to find out what's going on, what does it mean, how do we interpret it. So I very much appreciate you and the audience continuing to stick with us, and also to participate in the Q&A session after I finish babbling and Maya takes over the Q&A period. Maya?
Okay, well, thank you very much to everybody who watched that session, and it is on YouTube, it is on LinkedIn as well, you can find it there. And before we continue with the body of this session, I would like to say, well, a big thank you to our first sponsor, Kanchu, at Kanchu.com. Kanchu offers bilingual services in English and Japanese to individuals who want to buy and sell real estate in Tokyo and Yokohama. Kanchu also does property management and investment property. If you want to work with them, reach out to James Howell. You will find him on LinkedIn. You'll find also his contact details in the description of the YouTube video, but also it is james at kanchu.com. Reach out to James and talk with him about your next project. Okay, Timothy, it's you once again. Over to you. So
Thank you,
let's
Maya.
continue. I
It,
will.
it, sound, it sounds like something is rubbing up against your microphone, because every time you move around, I hear this big
Oh,
cat.
okay. Keep my muted. It's not my cat. My cat is in the other room today.
Okay,
Been so
safe from your clutches.
right.
So, ladies and gentlemen, getting back to the briefing, we have found that my briefing portion is taking a smaller proportion of the program, because the questions coming in are so rich and textured, and that's really where the beef and the bones of what's going on in Japanese politics occurs. Alternatively, though, we produce a synopsis of what we talked about each after each show. It usually comes out after 2 or 3 days, and this synopsis really compresses the points that I have made, and it identifies the questions, but it doesn't go into the answers of the questions. And if you're really interested, you really need to listen in on the Q&A portion, because that's where a lot of heat and light is produced. But let me get on to the rest of the briefing. The Prime Minister, he's been in office for 5 days. He's confronted with a couple of issues that probably are impacting his popularity or the disapproval rating of his cabinet. First of all, as you know, is the slush fund scandal that really drove Mr. Kishida just crazy. He could never hold a snap election. He could never get his bearing. He tried to dissolve the factions as a way of recreating the LDP and burnishing his image. It just never quite worked. But the slush funds scandal still lingers. Many people, the voters, have not felt that it has been fully resolved, even though the Prime Minister, Mr. Kishida, and also Mr. Ishiba, wish that people would just kind of forget about it. Let's move on. We have a new Prime Minister. That's in the past. When it comes time for the voters to voice their opinion, they get to do that because the Prime Minister said he wants to have an election at the soonest possible time. So the voters are kind of sharpening their fingernails and listening very carefully to the public pronouncements of this new prime minister and what he intends to do. So there are a couple of negatives that are already ascribed to Mr. Ishiba. The first is the slush fund scandal, what he's going to do about it. The unification church, it's still somewhat unresolved. I think the general population is very curious about what they were doing in bed with so many of the LDP members and what was the tit for the tat there. Finally, the flip-flops that the current prime minister has made on a couple of issues, not just his support for same-sex marriages or for spouses keeping their names even after marriages, but also what he's decided to do with the Asia NATO kind of concept, and also his decision to hold the election sooner rather than later. So as you'll remember, even on the campaign trail, he lambasted Mr. Koizumi, who said, if I become prime minister, I'm going to hold an election at the soonest possible time. And Mr. Ishiba said, well, that's just because you're so young and inexperienced, you don't want to be questioned. Me, the seasoned politician that I am, I want to have a long period where we can have questions, we can have debate, we won't have a snap election, we'll really chew on the issues, and then maybe at some point in time when the timing is right, we'll have an election. That's what he said throughout the campaign period. And as soon as he becomes president of the LDP, even before he became prime minister, he said, I'm going to have the snap election, this general election, at the soonest possible time. It is almost physically impossible to have it sooner than the date that he has chosen. So this little flip-flop and a couple of other things that he's done make people wonder what kind of prime minister he's going to be. The LDP, as you know, has a 25-person advantage. It has 50% plus a little bit of an advantage there. It's in a coalition with the Komeito, and that increases its advantage to about 57. Is that right? 57. So the Komeito brings another 27 into that group, and as a consequence of that, it's not quite a supermajority, but it is a majority, and Komeito always gets a cabinet position as a consequence of coming in. So there is a reward for maybe swallowing a little bit. You're the clean government party, you're the party for the oppressed and for the single parent families and for the people who really are having difficulty. That's your base to be in bed with the LDP. It makes re-election a little bit difficult sometimes, but at least you get that cabinet position, which is a pretty big deal. When we talk about what else the prime minister has to confront, he's decided that there's going to be an election. So that pits him clearly against the LDP against the opposition parties. The opposition parties, as you know, the main constitutional Democratic Party had their leadership meeting and elected a new leader 2 weeks ago, Mr. Noda, former prime minister. You remember I told you that the approval rating for the prime ministers was lowest with Mr. Taro Aso, and number 2 is Mr. Ishiba in starting, their opinion polls starting. Mr. Taro Aso had a lower approval rating than Mr. Ishiba has right now. His administration lasted less than a year, and it was Mr. Noda who came over and took over as prime minister, kicking the LDP out. So this battle that is being formed now by the LDP against the opposition parties, Mr. Noda, I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but in their leadership election, there were 2 factions within the Constitutional Democratic Party. One faction said, let's coalesce our forces with the opposition parties to kind of crush and take over the LDP. And the other one was, let's accommodate the LDP, let's be friends with them, let's try and build our base. And that faction lost out. Mr. Noda said we need to coalesce forces with the opposition parties, such as the Ishin no Kai and the others. And it seems that he's making a little bit of headway there. He is a very suave and polished politician. He's going to give this current prime minister a run for the money. And we're going to see that Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So Monday, the prime minister gets to make a statement. He will make a statement in the Diet. He will get some questions, but there's no retort back and forth. You get a question or a comment towards the prime minister, but that's it. On Tuesday, there is a tit and a tat back and forth. And then on Wednesday, the prime minister has a final opportunity, and then he will close down the House, and he'll say, I'm dissolving the House. There will be an election starting in 5 days. So that's somewhat of the calendar of events. But this last week has been so active, and I want to walk you through it. Today's Sunday. Everything happened. It was, he became the titular head of the LDP on Friday, 9 days ago. We had our briefing 1 week ago, and then on Monday, he was announced as to be the prime minister. So on Monday, he wasn't prime minister yet, but that's when he made his claim, I'm going to call for an election on the 27th. It really raised hair on the back of people's necks, especially the opposition, because they said, that's constitutionally mandated only for the prime minister. So who the hell do you think you are? You are the named head of the LDP, but you're not the prime minister. Mr. Kishida's prime minister until tomorrow. So some people took great umbrage at that. But then on Tuesday, they opened the Diet. The emperor came over. He opened the Diet session. Both houses collected in the upper house chamber, and they voted for prime minister, and Mr. Ishiba became prime minister. If you were watching the news, it was really pretty dramatic to see Mr. Ishiba accepting the applause, and also in LDP headquarters, seeing the reaction that he received from Mr. Suga, and also particularly from Taro Aso. So it was a bitterly fought fight. It was a runoff between Mr. Ishiba and Sanai Takaichi. It was a very close margin, and it turns out that Sanai Takaichi was supported by Mr. Aso. He lost out on that. And Mr. Koizumi lost out as well, also supported by Mr. Suga. And on this side, Mr. Ishiba, who was supported by Mr. Kishida and by Mr. Suga, came out on top, but just by the skin of their teeth. So getting back to the election and the outcome of the election, Sanai Takaichi, Koizumi Shinjiro, and Shigeru Ishiba had always been mentioned as the three top contenders. On Friday, we found out in the first round that it was going to be Ishiba and Takaichi, and then they had the election there. So the question becomes, of those 9 candidates who ran, what happened to those? And what we can say with pretty much clarity is, if there was any association with the Abe team or the former Abe members, or with the Abe faction, those people are out. So Sanai Takaichi, she became a candidate for prime minister because she was supported by Mr. Abe when he was alive the last time, when Mr. Kishida also ran but won. So she's affiliated with the Abe part. Mr. Kobayashi is also affiliated with the Abe part of the spectrum, because many of the younger members, 2-term or 3-term members, really liked him, a 4-year term member of the lower house from Chiba, from this area where I am now. And he appealed to the younger LDP members. He is out, and when the prime minister was pulling together his cabinet, he offered Ms. Takaichi and Mr. Kobayashi also party posts or cabinet posts. We're not quite sure. We have heard rumors of Takaichi being offered a party post, and she said, no, I'm not going to do it. If I'm not the Secretary General of the LDP, forget it. I'm not interested. And Mr. Kobayashi was similarly offered. So Mr. Ishiba, going into this general election, it's not that he just has Mr. Noda with the Constitutional Democratic Party to contend with. He's got people within his own party who are angry and have an agenda to diminish him. And already you can kind of tell that this this prime minister has not gotten off to a very clear start. We're going to know a little bit more in the next coming days, and then there's going to be the election, and then the voters will actually tell us. But it's going to be a very active week coming up. Let me get back through the rest of the week that we started with Mr. Ishiba being the party president. On Tuesday, they opened an extraordinary session. He became prime minister. On let me see what else happened on Tuesday. One of the things that he forgot to do when he was putting together his cabinet was he kind of forgot about Mr. Taro Aso, who was deputy prime minister, longest serving deputy prime minister. He was deputy prime minister under the entire Abe administration, under Mr. Suga, under Mr. Kishida. And in this election, Mr. Ishiba kind of forgot that Mr. Suga was there, and he appointed Mr. Suga as deputy prime minister. So this has got to irk Mr. Aso, and he made his feelings known in a couple of very dramatic ways. But Mr. Ishiba then put him back on. This is happening within the span of 24 hours as a supreme advisor to the prime minister. So it gives him something, but it's not really a constitutionally mandated. It's not even a party post that is authorized or acknowledged within the LDP. But what can he do? He had already kind of let the goat out, and now he's got to do something with Mr. Taro Aso to keep things calm. But you can tell that there's a bit of a seething rage there. I mentioned Takaichi and Kobayashi Takayuki also kind of refusing to be involved in that. The other issue that is confronting him that is becoming a little bit more apparent, it became apparent on Tuesday and Wednesday, is what is the prime minister's plan? He's decided to call the election at the shortest possible time. So of the LDP members who were tainted by this slush fund scandal, and as we know, the majority of those are LDP members, Mr. Abe faction members, and the Abe faction consists of about 28% of all LDP members. And a little bit more than 50% of the Abe faction were implicated in receiving funds. It was a policy within the faction to generate funds and then to distribute it and not to report it. So quite a few, I mean, the temptation there is pretty high. So quite a few of the Abe faction members, other factions heard about this. They thought this was a good idea. They did the same thing and they got punished as a result. But the biggest violators were the Abe faction. So they're completely out of this administration. But people are curious. So, Mr. Prime Minister, what is your intention? You want to clean the slate. You want to distance yourself from what happened in the slush fund scandal. Mr. Kishida never cleaned that up. He reprimanded a couple of people. He made them give up their party posts. For the really, truly violators, there were probably 3 of them. They had to give up their party posts, and they had to refrain from participating in LDP politics for a certain period of time. But they weren't kicked out of the LDP, and they have an opportunity to repair their images. And this is with them receiving, 300, 400,000, the equivalent of in U.S. dollars, maybe sanzen ma en, without paying taxes, without reporting it, just put it in their pocket. So these are politicians. You shouldn't be doing that, and politicians should be held to a higher standard. So the question, Mr. Ishiba, is we've got an election coming up. Is the LDP going to support and endorse those candidates in their elections? And for many of these politicians, they win by the skin of their teeth. It's like the Kamala Harris and Donald Trump election now. It's 48 to 51. It's 48 to 48. It's very, very narrow, even though your political leanings might be far to one end or the other. The general population, the margins are razor thin. So having the LDP endorse you is a very big deal, and not being endorsed by them, that means when they have the campaign posters and they say, I'm running for re-election, thank you for electing me for the last 5 times or the last 6 times, and it has the picture of Mr. Ishiba behind him. He's endorsed by, the LDP and by the current prime minister. So I'm a good gamble. Vote for me and good things will happen in our election district. They can't do that. It'll just be a picture of their face, just like any other person or an independent. They come across as being an independent. And the trick here is the opposition parties smell blood in the water, and they will join forces to defeat these tainted politicians. So with the LDP, with the 25-person margin, they could, many analysts have said they are distinctly going to lose at least 25 people in this new election. And what is Kometo's role there? And will Komeito continue to support the LDP? They have a new leader too, but they're supplying 27 members into the coalition. Will they increase in size? Will they get more members within their fold? And will the LDP be able to maintain that majority? It needs the majority in order to distribute all of the cabinet posts and all of the tough committee posts. So Wednesday, the sharp slide for the yen occurred. It was going a little bit strong, and then the prime minister said he doesn't want the Bank of Japan to raise interest rates this year. It's a little bit out of politics for the prime minister to say something. And in the past, especially towards the close of the year, most analysts had anticipated the Bank of Japan raising interest rates before the end of the year. So there's a bit of an anticipation there. So for him to come in and say something like that, the yen took a big hit. So we'll see what happens going forward. And Friday, just 2 days ago, his inaugural speech to both houses of the cabinet. Now we have the weekend here. He's watching this briefing, getting prepared for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. On Wednesday, he leaves for Laos. He'll be attending the ASEAN on Thursday and Friday, coming back on Saturday, Sunday. He's got 1 day Monday, and then the election starts on Tuesday the 15th for a 12-day election campaign. So that's a pretty dynamic week that we've got ahead of us, and very impactful. Our briefing next week, please don't miss that, because that's going to be pretty important. Let's see what we've got going forward. In other news, you remember we talked about the Maritime Self-Defense Forces destroyer, actually a battleship that passed through Taiwan waters to join up with other naval vessels for an exercise. It was the first time for the Japan Navy to pass through this area of the Straits, and it wasn't just a regular ship, it was actually a battleship. It's called the Sanami, the destroyer Sanami. It followed a German destroyer also going through there, and they collected this last week a flotilla of U.S., Australia, New Zealand, and Philippines naval and patrol vessels, and they collected and ran drills and patrols and exercises around the Scarborough Shoal, which is a real flashpoint in the Philippines, still within Philippines' exclusive economic zone, but once again showing the might and the coalition building that Japan is participating in. This is pretty interesting. This follows, you remember, the Chinese going through a flotilla of maybe 40 vessels headed by an aircraft carrier that sailed between two of Okinawa's islands. It wasn't a breach of maritime law, but it is very provocative. It's the first time for that sort of thing to happen. A major flotilla floating through there. And then we had this ballistic missile test by China last week, where it told everybody who was potentially impacted by the overfly that they had launched this missile. Please don't be alarmed. It doesn't have a nuclear warhead on it. It's going to land in the Pacific. But they did fail to mention Japan in that notification. So it is somewhat curious. Moving forward, the Canadian Coast Guard paid its first visit, a home port call to Yokohama. And so it looks like the coalescing of forces, not just with military assets, but also Coast Guard vessels, is starting to really take hold now. the Japanese have already contributed heavily to the Philippines Coast Guard and donated vessels to them. But this is the Canadians coming in with their Coast Guard vessel. It's an 85-meter icebreaker. The Sir Wilfrid Laurier paid a port call here. It's the first time for that to happen. So once again, we can see this growth, this integration, this lattice work of like-minded countries coming together to kind of build this kind of defensive network, and basically telling China, don't even think about it. If you move kinetically on Taiwan, everybody here is joined, and we have the assets in place. So this continues to go on. The Chinese have their exercises, military exercises. They tail and they mirror what's going on with, for example, this joint flotilla of American, New Zealand, Australian, Philippines, Japan forces. And, that's when mistakes can be made. So it's a very volatile, very active region. It's a place that we will continue to watch and report on as much as we can. You might remember that the former Abe faction treasurer was arrested and pretty much blamed for skimming all this money, 670 million yen over a 6-year period. The period actually extended far longer than that, but the public prosecutor's office decided to cut it to a 5-year period. So all of these numbers that you're hearing about certain politicians pocketing money, that's only over a 5-year period, or maybe even a 4-year period. So they didn't do the whole Monty and do the analysis of how much money they had received since this program was in place, and it was in place for about 20 years. But in any event, the treasurer pleaded guilty, and he was sentenced just on Monday. Mr. Matsumoto Juichiro was the treasurer and an accountant. He was arrested for underreporting these funds and distributing them to the members of the Abe faction. He's 77 years old, so you could say he was a bit of a patsy and they were looking for a scapegoat. He received 3 years in prison, suspended for 5 years. So he doesn't go to prison, but if he does anything wrong, then he will go to prison. If he does any accounting fraud, or maybe his toenails aren't clipped, then he could potentially go to prison, but that's just not going to happen. This follows with Mr. Nikai's, the Nikai faction accountant, also on September 10th, being found guilty. He likewise was sentenced to 2 years in prison, suspended likewise for 5 years. So this is not the tail end of that episode. The voters are watching this. They want people to take responsibility and to be punished for some of this. This is not the tail end of it. I think a lot of people are saying, look, the guilty were found, they were tried, they received a punishment, they're serving their punishment. We have a new prime minister, so let's all be friends, let's move forward. And I think that's what Mr. Ishiba would like to do. We won't know really clearly until later this week, when we hear from him what his decision is with regard to the tainted Abe faction members or other members who received political slush funds, and what the LDP stance is on that. So that's a big thing that's coming up this week. It will really tell the population, are you really for the people? Are you really trying to clean up the LDP? Or is this just window dressing? You really don't have your heart into it. You're just worried that this 25-person margin, you're going to lose it. And so even somebody who might have received money, you're going to endorse them because that holding those seats is so much more important to you than actually doing what you said you were going to do. Let's see what transpires over this week. Next week will be a great briefing as well. Maya, back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Timothy, for this.
Did I catch you unawares?
Almost, yes, almost, yes. So I know that it gives you pleasure. So
It does.
It's a win for you. Okay, so before we dive into the Q&A session, we already have accumulated quite a few questions on of the platforms, I would like to say thank you to our other sponsor, that is Houze Inc. So Houze Inc. and also Hana Urushisawa Howell. So they also offer bilingual services in Japanese and in English for people who are thinking about projects of custom home design, construction, and renovations, also commercial property construction. To contact Hannah, please check out the description of the YouTube video, or just reach out to her on LinkedIn and connect with her, talk with her in either language. She will be there for you and she will help you with your project. Houze Inc. is there. So they have been doing this for 40 years now, and well, they'll be happy to help you. That's
Your mic
for.
is still jumping around, Maya.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's surprising. Okay, I'm on full volume here, so I don't know why this is
No, it's
happening.
it's it's like something is brushing up against it. Maybe some paper that you have that's close to the microphone. I don't know, but it sounds like it's brushing up against something.
Oh, okay. Thank you for letting me know about that. So, then let's start with the Q&A. I
Let's
would like
go.
to go, yes, to go first with a commented question from Byron Johnston, which is on LinkedIn, and it actually came maybe about 20 or 30 minutes before we started the briefing.
Thanks,
So
Byron.
here we go. Yes. This snap election appears pointless, and likely every member of the lower house, who naturally will lose around $100,000 of income because of the early election, now has to raise legal money to fight in the election. So all these members, they must be frustrated. The new government does not seem to have achieved any lift in the polls either. What will happen to this government if the loss of seats is significantly larger than expected? This is also a point that Timothy raised with Dan Harada on Thursday, but he appeared not to want to address the potential impact of that. What would, okay, or what is Timothy's assessment on this?
That's a great question, Byron. Thank you very much, and thanks for watching the Tim and Dan briefing on Thursday. Yes, Dan didn't want to get into it, so Dan's in a bit of a delicate position, as you might be able to surmise. He is an LDP member. He's a card-carrying member. He is a naturalized Japanese citizen, and therefore he can vote and he can become a member of the LDP. I can't. I'm still an American citizen. So all of the people that are in the LDP, he knows all of them at the personal level, and he really is reluctant to say something that could be misinterpreted or actually negative in nature. He doesn't want to go there. He doesn't want to acknowledge that perhaps the LDP could lose 60 or so members, and then they need to scramble. And so just to address your point, if the LDP fell below 50%, and even in a coalition with Komeito, that number was below 50%, they would be in deep trouble. They would probably invite maybe the Democratic People's Party to join, but they're very small, maybe 8 or 10 members. Ishin has a few more, maybe 48 or so, 49. And the Constitutional Democratic Party has 99 members. Those are the opposition parties. So bringing in somebody else, probably the smaller of the three of those, but there are other, not fringe, but other opposition parties as well, to get them over that level. Because once you lose that majority, you lose the ability to select the cabinet. And if you want long-term survivability, you need cabinet posts, because that's where you can generate benefits for your constituents. You'll remain in your party position or in your political position for a longer period of time. And also your wealth grows just because of the favors that you've done for people. And like you said, running a campaign is expensive. At the same time, every member of the lower house knows that it is more likely that their term of office will end sooner rather than later. And that counts now also for the members who will be elected on the 27th. They could be up for election before this time next year, too. So they're always trying to collect money. They're having benkyokai, they're kissing babies, they're trying to generate political funds just in case they need it. They need a nest egg because the political machinery, no matter what party you're from, if it's not the LDP, it's somebody else, that those political parties don't provide all of the funds for you to become reelected. They might send somebody over to be on the sound truck with you and give them a microphone, but it's a lot of that money needs to be self-supporting. So yeah, it remains to be seen. I also feel like you that the LDP is going to take a beating. You've got Mr. Noda, you've got Sanai Takaichi, you've got Mr. Kobayashi, you've got the Constitutional Democratic Party under the leadership of the very able Mr. Noda. Yeah, it could be a very, and you've got Mr. Ishiba. Who knows how he's going to fare? He hasn't done so greatly well these last couple of days. And even within the LDP, you've got Mr. Taro Aso, who's still angry with him. And there's this, this bitter internecine warfare that's going on quietly in the background. Yeah, it's not a good mix. So I hope that responds, Byron. You always have these great questions. I don't know, the jury is still out on that one.
All right, yes, it is still out, and the next couple of weeks will be telling. Many people indeed doubt that Mr. Ishiba will have a long mandate, but we don't know that at this point of time.
Everybody said the same thing when it became Mr. Kishida. Everybody
yes.
says, I don't like this guy. He's not the guy that we had before. He talks different. He looks different. He's not going to last. I mean, they say that every time. But this time it does. I mean, the public, that resonates with the public. The lowest, I mean, only Taro Aso did worse in his first week in office. And it wasn't his first week. I mean, the poll was conducted over the last couple of days. So it's very fresh news.
Very fresh news still. Okay, yes, but we'll be watching what happens over the next weeks as well. So moving on to Clubhouse and to the questions there. So Cam has a question. How many seats could the LDP lose in the general election? You partially answered this question earlier in the briefing, but I don't know, would you like to address it once again, or would you like me to go with the next one?
Yeah, please go with the next one. I think I addressed that one. They have a 25-person margin. With their coalition partner, they have a 55 or 56 person margin. It's hard to say.
Okay, so the next one from Cam again. Will Ishiba be forced to take responsibility if they lose their simple majority of 233 seats?
Oh, it's worse than that. So as a prime minister, you're calling for an election. If you are not at parity after the election, you're basically a loser. But I think people understand that the public have to vent their frustration and their ire at the LDP by punishing them, because these people took, the fellow who's in my election district, for example, he took some money. I don't like it. I knew his father. I've voted for him 3 times, but voting for him just, I'm going to vote for somebody else. And that somebody else is not an LDP member. The LDP is not going to run 2 members in that election district, even if that particular member doesn't get the endorsement. Not getting the endorsement just lowers his possibility of being reelected. It doesn't mean that there's another LDP person coming in. So if they don't vote for the LDP person, they're going to go for somebody else. And the great thing about Mr. Noda is that he comes from the same school of thought as Mr. Ishiba. They used to be colleagues. They used to belong to the same political party. So it is a viable alternative if you're holding your nose and you just can't vote for the LDP candidate, whether you're disdainful of the LDP or you're disdainful of that particular individual. So yes, I think that there's going to be a lot of bloodletting.
Right. Well, that's fascinating. Unfortunately, yes, Mr. Ishiba is going to fight he has to fight within the party, as you mentioned earlier. So let's see what, the next questions here. So if there is a significant defeat, what kind of adjustments might the LDP make if Ishiba does not step down?
Yeah. Okay. That's a great question. I think there will be a lot of wrangling and wringing of hands. What are we going to do in order to maintain a majority? This is all speculation, so it's only the value is just as a kind of a thought exercise. But the LDP must maintain some sort of a control over what's going on in the Diet with the bills, with the assignment of committee chairs, and certainly with the cabinet portfolio as well. So what's going to happen is he's selected a cabinet. He closes down the House. All of the members give up their badge. They're not politicians anymore. Even the prime minister, they're without a mandate. They go through the election and they get elected or they don't get elected. They come back in. They start a new session of the Diet, but typically not immediately. So the election will be on the 27th. That's a Sunday. Then Monday, Tuesday, the new members of the Diet, you'll probably remember, they're very proud. They get a new suit and their parents come and they walk through the Diet steps, and the great doors in the beginning or at the very main entrance, they're opened up for the first time. Those doors are only opened up for the emperor and when there's a new batch of members to the Diet in the lower house or in the upper house. So that ceremony needs to happen, and it needs to happen when the Diet is in session. So before this year ends, after the election, but not immediately, maybe a day or two, or probably not a week later, but pretty quickly, there will be another session of the Diet where everybody receives their badge and the cabinet is recoalesced, reapportioned, and then they start business once again. There might be some members of the cabinet who actually have lost their seats, and there might be a little bit of switching going on there. But as the question indicates, what happens if at the end of the day the LDP doesn't have that and they're hanging by the skin of their teeth on maintaining it? What do? They would form a coalition with one of the opposition parties that would be enticed to join the LDP and vote for the cabinet posts and all of the things that are required there, because we will give you one cabinet position. That's how it works. So I hope that's somewhat clear.
Yes, and because you mentioned trading and also that the LDP might actually have to form a coalition with another party in addition to Komeito. Is there any way of you actually making a, let's say, prediction about how many seats Komeito
this question has got to be from Camilio, is it?
No, it's from somebody else. It's actually from Hiroaki on YouTube.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to put my foot into the dragon's teeth. But no, I won't make a prediction. Although I'm not an LDP card-carrying member, I do have lots of friends and colleagues in the parliament, and I don't want to make a prediction like that. And for a person like me that does this for a living, I'm in the Diet all the time. I don't want to diminish or alienate myself or my connections with any of the people that I have, and that's always been formed in my particular case on the LDP, but also predominantly on the Abe faction, because the individual who hired me out of law school, out of Japanese law school, was an Abe faction member, a prominent member of the Abe faction, went on to become foreign minister. So I know many people within the Abe faction, and it pains me that they're going through this ordeal. But also, it's pretty dastardly that they took all this money and hid it, and now they've got to pay the price. But no, I don't want to make a prediction. I think that's not my role to make predictions. My role is to report to you and to analyze how it looks and what it means and where it's going. But I'm not quite in a position to make a prediction.
Okay, understood. And thank you for that. Continuing with the questions from Cam in Clubhouse again. In the event of a major LDP defeat, yes, in the election, is there a chance a government led by the Constitutional Democratic Party of
Yes,
Japan could emerge? Yeah.
yes, yes. That is the second more real possibility. That rather than the LDP, I mean, if the LDP comes up really shorthanded, it is going to reach out to try and bring somebody in. But that whoever they bring in is also being courted by the opposition parties. Don't do that. And in fact, Komeito, why don't you come over to us? Why don't you stop being with those guys are just losers, and you are giving up so much of your spiritual energy to be assigned to them just for a party post. Come with us. We'll give you 2 party posts. Let's kick those bums out. That's the more likely scenario, rather than the LDP bringing I mean, both of them, those are very difficult to conceive of, but the Constitutional Democratic Party being able to weave their coalition of not quite like-minded other parties together just to defeat the LDP has a certain amount of appeal.
Well, okay, and it seems that, as you mentioned, the polls are not in favor of the cabinet at all, not in favor of Ishiba-san at all. Oh, it's going to be, yes, a
It's
very
it's
exciting.
already interesting. And you know, the other funny thing is that 3 weeks ago we were talking about Kono Taro. Over the last 2 weeks,
Yeah.
nobody has mentioned Kono Taro. There, you know, he's just completely fallen off the map. He's still a heavy contender. He's still a friend, a colleague of mine. I like him a lot. I believe that at some point in time he will be prime minister. But boy, that up down Japanese politics, you've got to stay on top of it because so much has dramatically changed.
Yes, so as you mentioned, Kono Taro disappeared entirely from the news, from the political scenes, as it seems. Of course, he will stay in the diet, of course, and of course, if he wins his seat again. But yeah, that's a dramatic change indeed. And so there is a very interesting question here in Clubhouse, which came just now from Hiroko-san. Do you think that the anti-Ishiba group might have foreseen this and let Ishiba win so
Yeah,
that his administration would be short-lived?
that is a great question and a great observation. So sometimes when the balance of nature doesn't really accommodate what you want to do and you force an issue, whether it's a personal relationship or a business deal or something like that, it already has the kernels of failure embedded in it. And it's more likely to survive or be defeated based on other things that happen as a consequence of that. So it's like nature doesn't want that equilibrium to exist, and I do sense that this was a forced judgment. Sanai Takaichi probably could have easily become prime minister. She would have been a good prime minister, but Mr. Aso just vehemently opposed having her as the leader. And so I think he spent a little bit more political capital, and you can see it in his face. You can see it in the face of Mr. Suga when they cross paths. It's like an unnatural alliance that just it could survive given some dynamics and some activants and some ingredients and some nourishment, but we just don't know, and we're in that delicate period now. The diet is still in session. It hasn't been closed. It'll be closed on the 9th. Then we have a couple of days of a hiatus, and then the election period begins. So lots of things can change. News will be coming out of the woodworks about this person's scandal or what this person said or all sorts of things like that. So it's going to be very, very active. And whether equilibrium is finally met because there is a bloodletting and there is a realignment, that's why this program is so popular. That's why more than 2,000 people watched this Dan and Tim video on Thursday. There's just an incredible amount of interest, and this being the geopolitical hotspot that it is, and what's going on with Taiwan and the Philippines and the Canadian Coast Guard joining the fray, it's a lot of activity to be here.
Right. It is indeed. But also, so we've got other questions. I'll continue with them. Cam, please forgive me for just saving your next question for a little bit later. I'll move to YouTube now. And Joe has two questions there. So he writes, just okay, give me a second. I'd be grateful to get your take on how much it really matters that Ishiba has support from rank and file, the rank and file members of the LDP. So is it important for Ishiba? Is it
Yes.
not?
No, it's critically important, and the rank and the file, that's because that's who's voting. It's not now who's going to become the party president and thereby the prime minister. We've shifted now, and we're going into an election. That's where individual people, not just card-carrying members of the LDP, but everybody. And so the LDP members who think, I like Ishiba, I trust him, I wasn't so sure about Mr. Kishida, but
Mhm.
I was never called upon to make a decision. There was no election. But now there's an election, and I like Mr. Ishiba. I think he will take us forward. And then they talk about it, and whatever your collection is, or what your job is, or who you work for, if you're a dedicated LDP member, you're encouraged to talk to other people who might be sitting on the fence, or maybe they're even in the opposition, to
Mhm.
talk it up, to talk about Japanese politics. Japanese love to talk about Japanese politics, so they love to throw stones and sling mud and talk about their politicians just like everybody else does. So having this army of people supporting you is critically important. And Mr. Ishiba, he said, let's have a discussion, let's roundly debate this thing, and then he changed his mind. There's meaning there. I think he was wagging his finger at Mr. Koizumi, saying, you're a little bit afraid, aren't you? That's why you don't want to open it up to debate and give the public an opportunity to examine what your policies are. And then he switches. So that does indicate, maybe, the pot calling the kettle black is, kind of attributed to you. You're trying to hide something
Mhm.
too and get this thing over as quickly as possible. Many analysts have said for a long time, for more than a year, when the LDP has an election, it's going to lose seats. And the critical thing is, call for the election when there's a little bit of wind in your sail. Mr. Kishida never had that. He kept waiting for it. He went to Camp David. He thought maybe the wind's going to come now. It just didn't. And now with Mr. Ishiba, I'm going to become prime minister. It's a new prime minister, and I have a honeymoon period. That honeymoon period never showed up. We're in the honeymoon period. It's already evaporated. So maybe it wasn't such a smart move. Sanai Takaichi never said that she would hold an election. She was actually a little bit reluctant to say that she would hold an election. Maybe let's let it run for the full term of the office of the lower house, and let's just continue to run diet affairs as normal. That was her position. Mr. Koizumi, of course, said at the earliest possible time, and Mr. Ishiba said, let's talk about it, let's discuss it, let's everybody have a chance. So uh, lots of tea leaf reading.
Lots of tea leaves reading. I mean, I remember an anecdote about Mr. Ishiba in Kasumi Gaseki. People there, they said about him that before he needs an important person, he says, I need to read a book or two before I do that. I go to meet that person. So maybe there is some truth to what you just said, about him waiting and,
Yeah.
testing. It's not exactly testing the waters, just waiting to see what happens. Okay, so thank you for that. But then, so I'll continue with the second question from Joe, and it is about okay, just a moment. Is the bully pulpit really a factor in Japanese electoral politics? Will it really help him, Mr. Ishiba? Will it help Mr. Ishiba overcome his unpopularity with other LDP lawmakers?
Yes, that's a great question, and it does matter. You can verify that when you go to the station during the election campaign period, and they have these election trucks, and then they have people that are standing up with, a bundle of microphones stuffed into their face. It makes a difference. People want to hear. They want to hear what your policy is. They want to hear you say something funny. For Japanese politics and election campaigning is very different than it is in the United States. There's a festival air about it. So these guys are entertaining you, but they're also revealing something about their personality. Sometimes they're a little bit crass, and they say something that appeals just to that audience. But yes, the bully pulpit carries a lot of weight, probably more weight than it does in the United States, just because of the pyramidal higher structure of Japanese society. You know, the top person says stuff, and we generally defer to people who are older or that have a position of power. And standing on top of a campaign truck with a bunch of microphones, that is a projection of power. So it does make you stop and listen and consider what it is that they said. And that applies everywhere, even with the prime minister in his policy speech on Friday. You know, people are listening to that. There were a couple of cat calls, but there was a couple of points that he hit off that responded well with the assembled members of both houses. So yes, the bully pulpit does carry lots of weight. I hope that's responsive, Joe.
Well, I hope so too. And well, moving back to Clubhouse now, Cam, it's again one of your questions. So to Timothy, do you
Yes,
think
I'm preparing
that...
to put my foot into the mouth of this beast. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes. Or to get on the grill, right? So, do you think that the U.S. Japan Security Treaty will be revised?
That's a great question. You know, the reason, ladies and gentlemen, why Cam is asking this question is because Mr. Ishiba holds himself out as a bit of a defense expert, and he's elected, or he's appointed Mr. Gunn as his defense secretary, also a very astute defense expert, long time. I've known him for many years. He was a member of the parliament when I was a Diet secretary 30 years ago. So I think we've talked on this show many times about the emerging defense military industrial industry that is being kind of generated. It's being suggested. I think it's not being really promoted much because it would scare the Japanese population. But the economy being as it is, the Japanese government is looking for the new industry. How can we generate money? How can we establish world prominence in some industry? So they thought it might be chips and condensers, and they have Rapidus, and then they have TSMC. But maybe that's not it. Maybe it's AI. So let's focus on AI. They've put a lot of energy there. But it also might be the defense industry. Let's embed Japanese technology into these armaments. But wait a minute. There's the Constitution that says we can't export offensive weapons. Okay, well, let's deal with that later, but let's try and get the economy back on track. So I think I was not so sure about it before Mr. Ishii became prime minister, but now in his pronouncements, he has already made a comment, an inference about the stationing of troops in Okinawa and the status of forces agreement that's in existence with the United States, which allows them to house troops, to store material, to have ships and airplanes and all sorts of things in Okinawa. I mean, that has maybe 85 or 90% of the U.S. presence in Japan is in the Okinawan Islands. And so his consideration that maybe we should revise that, and actually my idea, being a defense otaku that he is, let's change that and let's make it Japan ASEAN's NATO. So if you're in Korea or in maybe the Philippines or Vietnam, and you hear that from a country that had one time invaded you and decimated your culture, it might give you pause for concern. But that was 70, 80 years ago, and I think it is time for a revamp. And I don't dislike the idea of an Asian NATO. NATO doesn't belong in Asia Pacific, but a coalition. I mean, we've already had this. The buzzword in the United States is this lattice work of like-minded countries to present. They provide, they contribute, they coalesce, they cooperate militarily with intelligence and with their military assets, so that China is, always, going to have to really second guess what this lattice work could produce in the event that the Chinese, and they've said this time and again, that they will unify with Taiwan one way or the other, if by force, if necessary. So I think that this is a timing issue. China will not always be at this political and economic power. It will start to diminish, and with the current leader, he might say, "Look, it's now or never." And so I think any prime minister is going to say we need to be a little bit more self-reliant, not depending on the United States for this nuclear umbrella, and we provide support and services and maybe maintenance to some of their vessels. It needs to be far more robust. The problem there, as everybody else knows, is, and ignoring for a fact for a moment the Constitution in Article 9, just the population. The population is declining, and nobody really wants to join the self-defense forces. They'd rather make money working in the big cities for some of the companies that are renowned already in the world. So Japan is really trying to bolster yet a new industry, and if they could embed Japanese technology into lethal weaponry and export that, I think that would be a very effective new industry. So a lot of things need to change to realize that, but I think the prime minister, that's one of the things the prime minister is thinking about, and thus this question about status of forces. And is it, it's been a long time on the books. It is the underpinnings of the U.S. Japan relationship, so it's very important. When the prime minister starts to talk about that, there are people in the United States that really don't like it. And in fact, you might have missed the very terse congratulatory remarks from U.S. Ambassador Rahm Emanuel when Mr. Ishiba became prime minister. It was just like, congratulations, see you around. And that's from the representative of the United States. He might have sent him flowers and chocolates. I don't know, but that initial report came out, and you could kind of read that maybe the United States is not that favored with Mr. Ishiba. They'd prefer to keep status of forces and keep on pace with the Camp David Accord that Mr. Kishida and Joe Biden signed almost exactly a year ago.
Yes, that's an interesting dynamic there because, of course, a lot of the neighbors of, not a lot of the neighbors, but some of the neighbors of Japan here in this area, they are quite apprehensive of the U.S. presence and how Japan is talking about the change of the constitution in Article 9. So maybe there will be some opposition, I mean, diplomatic opposition to, what is to come. Or maybe there will be support, who knows really. It's also another thing to watch out for and to follow. Also, don't you think that there will be actually quite a strong opposition among the general population of Japan, to the idea of Japan producing lethal weapons?
Yes, because that invites being a target in the event of some sort of kinetic action.
Yeah, and
But
a lot.
you can't forget, in less than a month, there will be a new president of the United States, and if it's Donald Trump, it could be pay your fair share. We're not going, we're not going to provide that nuclear umbrella. I mean, you pay us to do that. We appreciate that. We send billions of dollars to Taiwan because that's important. But Japan, you're a wealthy country. You're the fourth largest economy in the world. You should be either paying us to provide that, or you should do it yourself. And I think up until now, the Japanese and the population and the LDP, which is dominated by U.S. politics, obviously, has made the choice that it's easier, it's quicker, we're generating money, we're not a target necessarily of North Korea or China or even Russia as a hotbed of aggression towards them, but we do service and support the United States. And so if you're mad at the United States, talk to them, but don't blame us, has been the general policy, a safe policy, so that Japan didn't have to focus on the military component of having a country. They pretty much relegate that to the United States. And that's why the self-defense forces is so small relative to what the economy is, and why the public just continues to blame the military for all of the trouble in the Pacific War, and everything bad that happened to Japan is blamed on the military drive that generated that.
Right. Okay, and since you mentioned former President Trump, there is an interesting idea here. This time it is from Hiroaki. So Hiroaki writes, Taro Kono comes back again after the U.S. presidential election. That's for sure. So I don't know what it means, but it's very interesting to think about. So Hiroaki, you may have some more information. So if you have that information, let us know. Share it in the comments. And I don't know, Timothy, whether you are willing to comment on this or not.
Well, I think there are a lot of people in Washington, D.C., like myself, who are familiar with Kono Taro and his father. So his father was the only person to become elected president of the LDP who didn't become prime minister as a result. His dad is great, a true politician. He became Speaker of the House as a consequence, and this is his son, his oldest son. And so I think there's a legacy there. There's a reputation, not only from the father being passed to the son, but also Mr. Kono has also generated his own reputation, his own chops. And so I think that there are many in the U.S. Japan hand community who favor somebody like Kono Taro, who they can talk to. I mean, his English is fluent. He was at Georgetown the same time I was at Georgetown. That's when I first met him. So there's a great affinity there, as you would expect.
Right. Okay. So thank you very much for that comment, sharing your thoughts on this as well, Timothy. With this, we have gone through all the questions and the comments at the moment. So to everybody watching us, if you have any other questions, any other comments, please let us know in the comment of your preferred platform. It could be YouTube, it could be LinkedIn or Clubhouse as well. You're very welcome for that. If you have questions which you want us to address next week during the briefing, also you can send them to us in advance. We'll be happy to get ready to prepare for them. And that's all for the moment, Timothy.
One other thing, the Dan and Tim briefing, post-election briefing, was so widely watched, and we appreciate that. I think we will also do something like that before the election is finished. So maybe on the 23rd or the 24th, a couple of days before the election, we'll also have a noontime briefing. And then maybe a week later, after the election, another special edition, maybe 25-minute briefing over lunch, Tokyo time, to talk about what the election meant, who's on first base, who's on second base, and what you can anticipate. And I think the audience generally appreciates that. It's a different kind of briefing than what you get on Sunday mornings, but I think the Tim and Dan combination is really a good one, and we have graphs and charts to kind of explain to people what's actually going on in the background. So thanks for that support. And if you like that idea, please, continue to hit like and tell us, either me directly or Maya, that's a great idea, and I look forward to it.
Yes, and also share if you find any insights in these briefings. Please feel free to share them with your friends, colleagues, acquaintances as well that might benefit from them. Also, please remember that Timothy Langley is doing these political briefings, because this is one part of what he does. He works, of course, in politics. He does, he gets these insights, but his main job, his main work is more in government relations and public policy and public affairs as well. So
it's funny that you mentioned that. So
yes.
I run into people all the time, Maya, and they say, "Oh, I see you. Are you a journalist, or are you like a professor? What do you do for a living?" And they don't know. So I don't mean to toot my own horn, but we do this briefing because this is something that I'm well seeped in, and it's not. I apologize. It's not really professional. I don't have a studio. I don't have graphs and charts. It's Maya and I getting together every week to fill you in on what's going on in Japanese politics. The only channel in the world that does that. And so we really appreciate you, the audience, tuning in. But also for a living, people, pay my company for, industry reports, for political analysis, for helping them out of problems. I was Apple Computer's general counsel. I was the general counsel for General Motors and here in Asia. So issues come up through the corporations that, will put your hair on fire. Those are the kinds of things that I've been dealing with. And so talking about Japanese politics, it's just kind of rolling off, the duck's wings, water rolling off the duck's back. But there are other things people generally come to us for, difficult, thorny issues that they're confronting. So if you've got somebody like that, or if you are like that, please consider giving us a call or writing an email to examine that. That's something that we like to believe we excel at. Thanks,
Right.
Maya.
Well, thank you, Timothy, for spending every Sunday morning on these sessions, doing them and letting everybody know what is going on in Japan, Japanese politics, the economy as well. And Hiroku-san, you said I watched it too. The PowerPoint file will it be available? We have the PowerPoint file. We usually don't send it out because it goes with the that's the session, the video session. But yes, if you would like to have it, maybe we can make an exception and send it to you. So thank you very
Well,
much for the question.
Maya, why don't we do this? The what are the 6 or 7 charts?
Yes,
Excuse me.
about that number, yes.
Yeah, if you write us an email and say something nice and flowery, and then ask politely, I guess we could send those to you via email
Right.
independently.
Independently, yes. Okay, thank you for that. And once again, I would like to say thank you very much to our sponsors as well, Kanagawa Chuo Jutaku or Kanchu, and also Houze Inc. You can find them online. You can find them on LinkedIn as well. Hannah and James are there. Please reach out to them if you have any projects in the field of real estate or building and also commercial management of properties and buildings as well. So thank you very much for this, Timothy, to everybody who stayed with us. We hope that you are in a nice environment where there is no rain, it is sunny, and you can enjoy your Sunday. So we'll be here once again next Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock with Tim Sullivan, and of course on Sunday morning at 8:20 with Timothy Langley, who is also very happy that this briefing is all over. Okay, thanks a lot.
See you later, Maya. Bye, everybody.
See you later.
Click, 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 click.